Even with high infection levels, top officials are saying that incoming tourism will see a takeoff. Indications that the kingdom will drop entry restrictions after the Songkran holidays come to an end. The news is coming with an encouraging takeoff in entry numbers in response to previous moves to lighten the load on travelers. There is now every reason to believe that the kingdom's critical and highly lucrative foreign tourism industry could turn into an economic bright spot for 2022 provided another COVID storm does not descend. Senior Thai officials within the government, in recent days, have talked up the kingdom's plans to fully reopen after the Songkran holiday period with a plan already agreed in principle to reduce paperwork associated with the Thailand pass system as well as insurance requirements while also replacing the RT-PCR test with an antigen test on arrival. This is despite one senior doctor with the Center for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, suggesting the country may already be experiencing 100,000 infections a day. Dr. Udom Kashintorn, a key advisor, however, points out that by comparison, infection levels among incoming tourists are far lower. The manager of Suvarnabhumi Airport Kittapong Kittakakorn, left, this week announced that the Airports of Thailand, AOT, was providing additional and better organized facilities to cope with a rapidly increasing level of passenger traffic of up to 3,000 visitors per hour. This followed days of chaos and pandemonium at the airport during peak hours as the arrival halls struggled to cope with boosted passenger numbers from all over the world as international travelers are increasingly putting COVID behind them. Thai Airways and the Tourism Authority of Thailand, TAT, predict that the country will see over 80,000 visitors a month from an Indian-Thai air bubble. Thailand looks set for a powerful takeoff in arrivals in 2022 provided the country proceeds with its full reopening plan, which very much now depends on the decision of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and experts with the Center for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, when clinical data is reviewed after Songkran. Tourist arrivals to Thailand have begun to take off with officials in Suvarnabhumi Airport forced to act this week to deal with congestion and logistical problems in the arrival halls. This situation comes with growing optimism that 2022 will see a takeoff for the industry and indications by top officials that despite rising COVID-19 infection levels, we will see the current RT-PCR test on arrival replaced by quicker and more informal antigen tests after the Songkran holiday period. As numbers of tourist arrivals have begun to surge, leading to the chaos in recent days at the main airport, top government officials are going out of their way to emphasize the willingness of the government to further liberalize the entry regime while insisting that all still depends on the path of the virus and in particular, the effect of the Songkran holiday festivities currently underway to celebrate the Thai New Year. Deputy Permanent Secretary at Ministry of the Interior says full reopening to proceed after Songkran. This week, Chaiwatchuing Kosum, the Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of the Interior told reporters that it was increasingly likely that the kingdom will proceed with its plans for a full reopening of the country at that point. This was also the line taken by former Premier Abhisit Vijayjiva, on Tuesday, who said that the government was facing a rising economic imperative after 2 years of economic devastation to the economy to reopen fully to international tourism. Fears growing that COVID may yet derail plans to reopen fully to foreign tourism from July 1 next. This has been particularly aggravated by the competition Thailand is facing from other worldwide tourist destinations such as the Maldives, which have reopened as the pandemic and the virus threat, while not being officially declared endemic as of yet, is increasingly being treated as a fact of life that countries and people must live with. Ex-Premier Abhisit worried about Songkran's impact. Mr. Abhisit said that while the government has plans to declare the virus endemic, he was concerned about the aftermath of the Songkran festivities. "I'm worried the post-Songkran festival numbers will probably not go down," he said. The former premier indicated that the way forward was for the government to target the more vulnerable in the community with its vaccination program, including an estimated 1 million Thai people, over 60, who are not yet inoculated. Virus threat remains for older and non-vaccinated people in the population, says Dr. Prasit Watanapa, must vaccinate more to see lower fatality rates. The residual threat from the virus was explained by Dr. Prasit Watanapa, the Dean of Suriraj Hospital's renowned medical school, which is part of Mahidol University, a key advisor to the Thai government and the Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. He said the key goal for authorities must be to reduce the fatalities that derive from the virus, which looks like it will continue to spread but currently has an elevated level of resultant deaths. He said the key to this was vaccination and pointed out that 50% to 60% of those who had died recently from COVID-19 were not vaccinated, while 85% to 90% were from vulnerable groups such as the very aged and with underlying conditions. Dr. Prasad said that the acceptable level of fatalities from the disease was 0.1% or less of the number of daily infections. Current death rates are still too high, Suraj Bose. On this basis, he said that the current death rates are more than 3 to 4 times the acceptable level. For instance, with 20,000 infections, there should be no more than 20 deaths. To put this in perspective, in the last 2 days Thailand recorded 42,997 cases with confirmed deaths of 207 or 0.481%. The top medic would like to see more emphasis on vaccination, as does former Premier Abhisit, who said that vulnerable people in society must receive a full course of vaccines including first and second booster shots. Tourism Authority of Thailand, TAT, Bose predicts further easing of restrictions shortly after Songkran. Meanwhile, the governor of the Tourism Authority of Thailand, Yuthaisak Supasan, has suggested that after Songkran there will be a further easing of entry restrictions, including not only a switch to the more convenient and swift antigen tests on arrival from the current RT-PCR tests stipulated, but a reduction in the insurance requirement from the current $20,000 and changes to the Thailand Pass application, although not yet its abolition, which is being demanded by a chorus of both travelers and foreign tourist business concerns at this stage. Is it time to reopen fully with normal visitor access? Have your say here as a Thai Examiner reader. Click to open. This has been confirmed by Dr. Torsilt Visanuyathin, who has followed up on the briefing given after the last Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration (CCSA) meeting, in which Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha ordered a review of data after the Songkran holiday to include infection rates and clinical data across Thailand as well as incoming infection rates. Reform of Thailand Pass on the cards as well as a lower insurance requirement, all agreed in principle. Dr. Torsilt stressed that while all must be dependent on due regard to any potential public health threats, measures have been agreed upon in principle not only to replace the RT-PCR test for tourists on arrival but also other moves to make Thailand more competitive. He said this will not yet include the abolition of the Thailand Pass entry app but a reduction in the number of documents being required to be submitted. The elimination of the app is also not off the table for the future. The key spokesman said that these relaxations have been agreed upon in principle and will be made across the board. The changes will impact those arriving under the Test and Go program, the sandbox schemes and alternative quarantine programs. Airlines and business leaders cautious and fear an about turn if COVID numbers surge after the holiday. This comes as there is concern within the travel industry, including airlines, that the evolving situation is still fraught with risk and that the government may be forced into an about turn if the level of infections and deaths remain high. The travel sector calls for endemic status, scrapping of Thailand Pass and full normality on entry to the country. One key medical official, Dr. Udom Kashintorn, who works with the Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, estimates that even now, real infection rates in the kingdom are running at 100,000 per day, with many confirmed antigen tests not being reported and other infections going undetected at all. Top government doctor, infection among incoming travellers significantly lower than local infection rates. However, Dr. Udom agreed with moves towards relaxing entry into the kingdom to spur on the economy. He pointed out that the level of infections among incoming arrivals was quite low compared to the prevalent level of local infection. The foreign tourism industry has the potential to become an increasingly bright spot economically for the kingdom as the year progresses, with many now estimating that the country can exceed the 6.2 million visitors projected last week by the World Bank and hit up to 10 million if the current restrictions on entry are eliminated. Bullish Tourism Authority of Thailand, TAT, Bose sees a return to millions of tourists per month in 2022. Speaking this week, Tourism Authority of Thailand, TAT, Bose Yuthaisak Supasan was bullish, predicting over 1 million visitors a month in the last quarter of 2022 but anticipated some restrictions remaining in place. Assuming most of our entry rules are lifted and the Chinese market can return, we may be able to run at full speed for the last 3 months this year, the tourist agency governor said. Prior to the pandemic, we had at least 3 million arrivals a month in the fourth quarter. This year we may see 30% of that level. Key economists, officials, and tourism industry leaders believe that Thailand must boost arrivals this year due to rapidly shifting economic conditions. Official figures for the first quarter show the kingdom received just 476,000 visitors, but this was well ahead of the 421,000 seen for the whole of 2021. Speculation of a return of Chinese tourists this year, but that market will still take time to redevelop. There is even talk of a return of Chinese tourists to Thailand at the end of the year if the communist country lifts the current border restrictions imposed on its populace. A cautious Association of Thai Travel Agents president, Sisadiwat Chiweratanaporn, emphasized this week that the situation in China was difficult to predict, particularly with the worrying resurgence of lockdown restrictions seen in recent days in Shanghai. He also suggested that matters may become more predictable in China after the Communist Party holds its 20th National Congress in the autumn. Nonetheless, he remained hopeful that there may be some limited return of the key market, which contributed over 27% of visitors in Thailand's record year of 2019. Mr. Sisadiwat pointed out that, even if the trade resumes, there may still be barriers with long quarantine periods for visitors on their return home and a need to build up the necessary flights links with China, with many airlines remaining extremely wary given their tumultuous experience since 2020. All seasons tourism from China welcomed. If Chinese tourists do return, they would be welcome in Thailand as they are a constant source of foreign tourism traffic for the kingdom, which would not be seasonally dependent. Thai tourism is in dire need of the Chinese market as they are year-round travelers, unlike European guests, the key market for Thailand at the moment. European visitors are rather seasonal. However, we should wait and see for a clearer statement from Chinese authorities, he said. Air bubble with India is proving successful with a potential for 80,000 visitors a month after May. At the same time, both the Tourism Authority of Thailand and Thai Airways are cooperating in the development of an air bubble agreement with India, which was agreed upon in March. Thanat Phetsuwan, the Deputy Governor for Asia and South Pacific with the Tourism Authority of Thailand, TAT, said since it began it had generated 600 arrivals from India per day. The government agency is working with Thai Airways and its subsidiary Thai Smile with an estimate of 13,000 visitors a month and hopes that this may surge beyond 80,000 visitors per month after May. India is an important market to offset the loss of Chinese tourists. It has a sizable population and a large number of passport holders, explained Mr. Thanat. The arrangement is also proving beneficial to Thai Airways, which has increased its flight loads to between 60% and 65% so far in April, with positive effects also on outbound international routes from Bangkok as Indian travellers opt to travel again to world destinations beyond Thailand such as Melbourne in Australia. Prime Minister still committed to trying to balance competing needs of public health and the economy. Despite earlier gloomy remarks by the Prime Minister before the recent Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration (CCSA) meeting, officials are upbeat that within weeks of the Songkran holiday period, there will be further easing after the PM has reviewed the figures. After the last meeting, General Prayut promised to pursue a balanced approach to what is still a key and difficult question for the government. We will try our best to balance public health and the economy, the Prime Minister is reported as saying. Pandemonium at Suvarnabhumi Airport this week as more arrivals push logistic arrangements to the limit. Meanwhile, the effects of the easing of restrictions were clear to see this week at Suvarnabhumi Airport where, from last weekend, there was pandemonium at certain hours at the airport which saw it attempting to process up to 2,000 incoming passengers per hour. This was from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. and from 12 noon to 3 p.m. as an increased number of flights with higher loads landed. The confusion was addressed by the manager of the airport, Mr. Kittipong Kittikakorn of Airports of Thailand, AOT, who said that his team was making new arrangements to handle up to 3,000 people per hour and pointed to stringent new normal public health requirements which the airport was strictly adhering to as being the reason for the problem combined with rising incoming traffic. The key problem appeared to be at counters for incoming passengers where they are required to rendezvous with hotel operators under the still-in-place RT-PCR requirements which require one night's overnight stay while the test results are processed. Poised for takeoff providing a storm is not brewing. Mr. Kittipong said that the 8 counters over the weekend had been increased to 17 this week and that a more efficient approach was being operated with hotels being displayed in alphabetical order. Improvements had also been made with more baggage exits and customs checkpoints being introduced. Last week, Mr. Kittipong indicated that a further terminal may be reopened in due course as the country's foreign tourism industry ramps up its thrust skywards. This is long-awaited good news for Thailand and an opportunity for an uplift in the challenged economy provided another COVID-19 storm is not brewing as it was this time last year.